Welcome to the High Performer webinar series provided by TMIT Global, a nonprofit medical research organization. I'm Dr. Charles Denham, chairman and founder of TMIT Global, and will be your host today. For those of you who are watching the program live, watching the video recording, or listening to the podcast, you may go to www.safetyleaders.org and select today's session to download the slides. As is our custom for many years, we always ask for the voice of the patient to really set our compass heading for the direction that we'll go today. And Jennifer Dingman has recorded this for us today.
Thank you, Dr. Denham, for your kind introduction. It's an honor to be here today, and this program is very exciting for me and all of us listening. It's about emerging threats, which there are so many that involve patient safety. I want to thank everyone for being here, and please invite your friends, families, and colleagues to listen to the recording after this is over. I'm anxious to get started, so I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Denham.
So Jennifer Dingman is a longstanding patient advocate, and those of you that are joining us for the first time, Jennifer meets almost every other Saturday with a group of patient advocates who have lost patients who are family members, children, parents, siblings. She is a nationally ranked author and a national contributor to many organizational functions in patient safety, including with federal agencies as well as nonprofits. Jenny has been a tireless worker in this area, and she's a 2018 winner of the Pete Conrad Global Patient Safety Award for her work in the area of hospital-acquired conditions, which has led to hundreds of thousands of lives being saved and tens of billions of dollars. And so we're so appreciative that Jenny was able to record this for us today. She's on vacation. So today we have a terrific group. I just briefly introduced Jenny Dingman. We also have the head of emergency readiness and preparedness for the University of California, Irvine, Randy Steiner. We have David Morris, who's a forensic psychologist, as well as a JD and a real expert in insider threats. We have Dr. Casey Clements, who will be our anchorman at the end of the session and be addressing what it's like to be on the edge of public safety and operating emergency departments. And he's also responsible for safety across the Mayo Clinic system and emergency medicine doctor, both an MD and a PhD. And we have Chief Bill Adcox is a live reactor today, who's really a pathfinder in the area of threat safety science. He is the Chief Security Officer and a Vice President at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, where I had the joy and opportunity of training and doing my medical oncology sessions. And we have Dr. Greg Boats, who's on vacation, but also came in by a videotape, and he is a full professor in critical care and anesthesia at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, as well as being an adjunct clinical professor at Stanford Medical School. And we also have our youth leader, who is the chairman of our youth and young adult program, Charlie Denham, who is my son, who will share with you some of what we'll be doing in the areas of opioid and preventable harm. Today, we're going to cover inside threats, outside threats, and mixed inside and outside threats. The inside threats are mainly generated by internal systems or people. Outside threats are mainly generated from the outside. And mixed inside-outside threats are those that we might say have major contributions from both sides. The real life is pretty messy. It doesn't lend itself to us being able to fully classify things. But what we wanted to do was make sure that we'll cover that with you. We'll only briefly mention, and we have them in the slide deck, our social media areas and presence, where we'll have more presence this year and continue to, and you can see the addresses on our slides. What we do want to address is our purpose, mission, and values. Our purpose is we'll measure our success by how we protect and enrich the lives of families, patients, and caregivers. Our mission is to accelerate performance solutions that save lives, save money, and create value in the communities we serve. And our I care values that our values that spell I care are integrity, compassion, accountability, reliability, and entrepreneurship. And the HR guru that has really led so many organizations to understand the importance of core values and a purpose, and Rhodes, led us to really help drill down in that area. So what we'll do today is also just briefly address our disclosures. Our disclosure statement is found on our slide 12. We won't review them, but none of our speakers, recorded or live, have any financial issues to disclose. And TMIT has been operating since 1984. And this program, the TMIT Global High Performer Webinar Series and our podcast, have no direct, indirect, or affiliated financial support which has ever been provided by healthcare pharmaceutical companies or device companies, and we don't intend to do that as well. I'll just briefly, for those of you that are new to us, address the fact that we have about 500 subject matter experts who have joined our group, who contribute their time and effort and talent to help us serve about 3,100 hospitals and 3,000 communities. So what we'll do is we will direct you to some of the short videotapes that talk about many of our activities. But today is to address these 30 emerging threats. And Chief Adcox and I and Dr. Boats and a number of experts from Mayo and the University of California system at multiple sites, UCSF, UCI, USC, the Harvard affiliated hospitals, the Cleveland Clinic, and a number of others, got together 3 or 4 years ago to focus on what should be keeping our leaders up at night, or what are keeping our leaders up at night. And this was before the COVID pandemic. And oddly enough, that was one of the areas that we focused on. So there are 30 what we describe emerging threats. Some are visible, some are invisible. And I'm about to show you a videotape to invite you, if you are at a major medical center, a small hospital, a healthcare community group that is serving patients and families in any way, first responder groups, law enforcement. We would like to invite you to join us. And if you, for those of you that are on the podcast, go to safetyleaders.org/emerging threats. That's www.safetyleaders.org/emerging threats. And you can fill out a form to join us. We do not want to give the bad guys, and as you will see, many of the agents of harm to our healthcare system are people that are intending to do harm. And we do not want to share with them the information that will be in a drill down fashion that we'll all use to get better and make things safer for our patients and families. So we would invite you to join us. And the videotape that I'll now show describes this, what we call community of practice. We've been running them for many years. We've run them for Google, for GE, for the Leapfrog Group, for the National Quality Forum, and many organizations. And these are learning communities that work together, share data, and share best practices. And in light of the challenges that we face today, we're going to make this a private, no cost, zero cost, but a private group in the drill down. In the aggregate and at high level, we'll share the information very broadly, but the intention is to help organizations get better without tipping off the bad guys. Hi, I'm Dr. Charles Denham. Today's briefing is on a topic that we think might be important to you. We have launched a private community of practice for medical center leaders by identifying emerging threats that are increasingly challenging their medical centers today, from workplace violence to cybersecurity and nation-state influence, to patient safety issues of errors of omission and misdiagnosis, to academic fraud, conflict of interest, defamation, drug diversion, and critical medication shortages. The number one risk keeping our top leaders up at night is the potential damage to their brand, which is increasingly vulnerable to these emerging threats. Security, administrative, clinical, research, and governance leaders from our most highly ranked academic, regional, and specialty medical centers are working together to address these emerging threats and confidentially share best practices with each other. The program is hosted by the Global Patient Safety Forum, run by TMIT, a 501c3 medical research organization. It is invitation only, entirely free, and has no commercial purpose. It is funded by private family philanthropy, as was the original Leapfrog Group survey, also developed by TMIT, and uses the same approach. Founded in 1984, TMIT leads the longest-running global patient safety community of practice in the world, having delivered more than 250,000 hours of continuing education through more than 130 consecutive monthly webinars over 11 years. The network of more than 80,000 clinical and administrative healthcare leaders has been continuously surveyed for satisfaction, requests for safety content, and priorities. They have driven the direction of the curriculum, shared best practices, and given us a head start on all-cause threats. Using the same approach, our newly founded Emerging Threats Community of Practice does not, nor will it ever receive direct, indirect, or affiliated financial support of any kind from the healthcare industry. Threat safety science is a new discipline for healthcare that harnesses much of what we've learned from successful patient safety programs. It takes a systematic approach to specific threats by reducing vulnerability through increasing resilience and thereby reducing the risk of harm. Harm to those we serve, those who serve, and our property, both physical and virtual. Those we serve are our patients and their families and loved ones. Those who serve are our caregivers, professional administrators and their staff, and researchers. Our property is both physical and virtual, such as intellectual property, information systems, digital operations, and medical records. There are also our reputations that are at risk from the explosive impact of misinformation that is now broadcasted over the internet. Misinformation that is instant, searchable, and permanent. Threats to those we serve, those who serve, and our property may originate from outside sources, inside sources, or a mixture of both. Some are man-made threats and others are natural. For a given threat, the goal is to decrease vulnerability and increase resilience. Mathematically, this reduces the risk of incidents and the magnitude of the harm they generate. Threat velocity, or the speed at which these threats are challenging our leaders, is accelerating and making it ever harder to keep up. This demands that we collaborate with others and share what we learn. The problem is that the threat spectrum is very much like the electromagnetic spectrum. It's comprised of both visible and invisible components. Like an iceberg, although many of the threats are above the waterline, visible and easy to spot, many of them are invisible and are hidden under the waterline. We're unaware of them until we're surprised when they cause harm. It's helpful to have a set of operational definitions to help classify harm during the process of care. Unintentional harm to patients by caregivers and administrators, such as errors of commission, errors of omission, and harm due to recklessness, are very much different than intentional harm. Although much of preventable harm can be linked to the actions of our people, the majority are system faults and errors of omission, not errors of commission, which up until now have been the focus of our patient safety experts. A small minority are due to recklessness, such as actors knowingly violating procedures and taking shortcuts, and when so-called enablers ignore such behaviors and allow care to be compromised. Thankfully, even fewer are actions overtly intended to cause harm, which we call redcoat crime, that are often sensationalized by the press. This video introduces a survey of medical center leaders regarding critical emerging threats. Those surveyed may at their option decide to join our community of practice tackling these issues, or those surveyed may just request the survey summary of insights from their colleagues be sent to them. Anyone can limit their participation to just the survey alone. The survey is of leaders in security, administrative, clinical, risk, compliance, and patient safety roles of the top-ranked medical centers. The goal is to inventory and prioritize emerging threats and measure our leaders' interests and best practices. Our global emerging threat community of practice will be focused on understanding, developing, and adopting the best practices using world-class methods of prevention, preparedness, protection, and performance improvement. These activities include online webinars, on-demand training, case study development and discussions, white papers, in-person meetings, and the use of assessment tools. The community will be developed using the 5C innovation model we have used with Google, the World Health Organization, and the Leapfrog Group. It will be enabled by multimedia and the IHI All Teach, All Learn model that has been used so successfully in performance improvement. We will convene invited leaders, connect them in whatever manner they wish, celebrate the great work they are already doing, co-create new concepts, tools, and resources that can be provided to the entire group, And over time, as the cycle repeats itself, we hope to impact change through the participants in their regions and hopefully across the world. Some organizations may just want to take our survey and receive the private aggregated results, and that's enough. And that's fine. Others may want to get more actively involved in collaborating. Organizations may participate at any level they wish and dial up or dial down their activities at any time. For skiers used to the symbology, level 1 is like the green slopes, where those who want to participate may do so at the most minimal level, may passively observe, participate in webinars and online content, even remain anonymous if they wish, and they may just have one representative participate. Level 2 is an intermediate stage. It includes the learning at the first level and adds to that initiating an internal training program to address one or more of the emerging threats. They also will have the option of sharing data. At the more comprehensive level 3, an organization that is operating at levels 1 and 2 may want to add local outreach and training to those in their region or ecosystem. They may want to do some limited emerging threat R&D. And finally, at level 4, certain organizations may want to become a global center of excellence, undertake more comprehensive emerging threat R&D, and even become a global education center that others want to visit so that they can watch and learn. This is the double black diamond level. The leaders from our top-ranked medical centers and the global subject matter experts in emerging threats who contributed to the design of this survey and the community of practice invite you to join this cause, the cause of preventing harm to those we serve, those who serve, and our property, both physical and virtual. The information you share will remain private and confidential. It will only be shared with the participants as an aggregated summary. There is no cost to participate in the Emerging Threats Community of Practice. You may find more information and see our team at the Global Patient Safety Forum website at www.globalpatientsafetyforum.org. Please join us. So we're delighted to have any of you who wish to sign up, and however, we will be making sure that that those who sign up actually are from major medical centers or healthcare facilities, be they small, large, whatever. But we want to make sure that we've got real clarity over the not only keeping things private for you all, but also making sure that we're not informing bad actors of what we might not want to have them know. So what we've done is we've organized each of these 30 elements, and the world is messy. They don't self-aggregate in a perfect way. But what we did was we took those that have a major impact on or are impacted by integrity, or people that are intending to maybe do things that are not within policies and even criminal activities, more over on the left. And moreover, on the right are the systems related issues. And then there are some mixed issues on the bottom. I'll draw your attention to the top one, which is brand damage. Every one of these contribute to brand damage. And so we include it as one. And what we'll be doing is a deep dive on each one of these subjects. So this is kind of an introductory walkthrough. For those of you that are on the podcast, we have the list of these, and I won't rattle them off to you, but we would wish that you would go to our website and take a look at them, and we'll cover them by name as we go through them. It's a real pleasure to introduce Randy Steiner. He is the Director of Emergency Preparedness at the University of California, Irvine. He is a best-selling author of a book that really guided his family in the area of emergency preparedness. His father actually was a pilot. He was a physician, and they were in a plane crash when Randy was just a young child. His mother was killed in the crash. His father recognized that there was very poor emergency care of those with trauma because there was a great delay in the care that his family received, and developed the system now that is being used all across America and many places in the world to deal with trauma, for advanced life support and trauma. And Randy wrote the book, The Light of the Moon. We've been working very, very closely with Randy and the University of California, Irvine to do emerging threat assessment and help deploy solutions that can address many of these issues that we're addressing today. we had a wonderful opportunity of actually digging down into these topics and asking Randy to kind of address the areas that are important to those that are in charge of emergency response. And so we'll have Randy now take it away. So Randy, thank you so much for taking the time today to address these critical issues that are important to the emergency response leaders. All of them are pertinent to brand and brand damage, we know. So they all flow into that. We know that that's a major pillar of the work you do. So cybersecurity operations issues and patient records issues are in your domain as an emergency responding leader or response leader. How are you tackling this, and what do you recommend to our organizations?
Well, first of all, addressing the issue on all of these issues, conducting a hazard vulnerability assessment of your institution, finding out where these various issues fall on your spectrum of priorities for emergency preparedness and response, and taking each of these issues and creating a plan to them is very important. In the case of cybersecurity, we've just recently done some tabletop exercises and have redeveloped our whole cybersecurity strategy around some of the findings from that. And that's with cybersecurity, particularly, a lot of hazards, that the physical hazards that exist at an institution such as a university. You write an annex or some kind of document, an appendix to deal with those particular issues. With cybersecurity, you have to have an entire institutional wide strategy. It can't be just a single annex and say, okay, emergency management, you've written the plan. This has to be something where everybody in the institution has to be on board with, not just having an understanding of cybersecurity issues such as ransomware, such as an attack on a system, but also an understanding of how to avoid it. So training is a huge piece of that. Also, in academia particularly, we have a very big issue with what we call shadow networks, where a researcher will set up their own server to support their research that's outside of our OIT protective infrastructure, our IT protective infrastructure, which is a vulnerability. So addressing those, identifying those issues is a really major thing to protect the institution from it. So obviously an institution like the University of California, Irvine, the data that are in those systems is our most valuable asset for the university. So having a overall comprehensive strategy to deal with cybersecurity issues, and cybersecurity as a whole, not just ransomware, not just any other type of cybersecurity threat, but an entire comprehensive plan is really important. And that's something that we've been working on really diligently at UCI as this threat emerges.
So, we're seeing more and more things that we can learn about insider threats, and we have Dr. Morris will be covering those a little bit later in our program, so we won't dwell on it because all of these kind of land in that area. But sabotage, employee fraud, and nation state influence, and the stealing of intellectual property, all of these things really are areas which land in your wheelhouse. Isn't that a fair statement?
Yeah, because these are, some of the causative or potential causative factors of any type of incident, whether it's something having to do with cybersecurity or data, but even actually physical issues on campus or physical threats to the campus, such as fire or damage to a building or flooding or things like that. Somebody on the inside can create those kind of issues. And in any of our buildings, there's any number of or amount of research going on that could be impacted by any of those acts. So that insider threat and understanding it and having a way to detect it and mitigate that as a potential threat is really important. You're never going to get rid of it completely, but acknowledging the threat, that's probably the most important thing we can do. Institutions tend to be like, no, we're not. Our employees are all happy and we're fine, but that's where it's going to be a big surprise when it actually happens. To acknowledge that there's the possibility of that insider threat and taking actions to mitigate that is really important to the process.
And then clearly, sexual misconduct the racial and or sexual discrimination are really now interpreted as violence. And when we think about workplace violence, active shooter, violent intruder, and deadly force incidents, and domestic terrorism, violent acts against leadership where they're targeting leadership, and intentional harm to patients, these are all violent and harmful events that land in your domain as well. And that's why you work within the police department at UCI. Is that true?
Yeah, and it really, comes into sexual misconduct and racial and sexual discrimination, particularly on a college campus. People in leadership, which all of our emergency management folks are, we're all covered under the Clery Act, which is a federal act named after Jean Cleary, who was raped and murdered in her dorm room at a university. And this is a national act that requires that we have systems in place for reporting structures, and that when police or other entities become aware of these types of acts, including workplace violence, including any kind of threat, or physical type of crime, that there's a process by which we notify the community, the campus community, that these crimes happen. So where the Clery Act came from was Jean Cleary's parents didn't realize that at this university, and I apologize, I can't remember the university off the top of my head, but that it was there was a significant amount of crime, of violent crimes, crimes against people at the university, and the university did not report that. So her parents petitioned Congress to pass the Clery Act, which requires institutes of higher education to report out what kind of crimes they have on campus and the frequency of those kind of crimes. So that really plays into it. On the side of actually, the preparedness cycle, or the emergency response cycle, preparedness and mitigation are a huge part of that. Response and recovery are the other pieces of it, but that preparedness piece is acknowledging once again that the threat could exist, finding where the weak spots are, and then the mitigation piece is really important to this. You're not always going to be able to prevent somebody who's intent on committing a violent act, but you can take mitigation measures by looking at your buildings, looking at the physical infrastructure, looking at the types of doors you have, the types of windows. How do you secure those? How do you protect the people in the institution should something like this happen? That mitigation piece is so important to the violent intruder or acts of violence issues that hit institutions like ours.
Well, Randy, we've really covered to a great degree drug diversion for personal use, opioid overdose in our last webinar. Thank you for your contribution there. And we've had RNJDs help us in that area. So we won't dwell on it, but we all know not only diversion for personal use, but also for profiting, and also the diversion even before it gets to the medical centers are important. But I think you really brought up a really important issue, and that is preventable death and severe injury. It's really critical. All of these areas that we're covering today, is it a fair statement to say that they're exploding, they're increasing in number? And secondly, shouldn't organizations be responsible for reporting preventable injury and death of their students?
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah, it's when there is it goes back to the Clery kind of response or reporting mechanism, that if you're having a significant amount of, say, fentanyl related deaths or overdoses, or any kind of drug related issues, if there's a significant amount of that occurring on a college campus, then I think parents have a right to know that that's a threat, that this, you're sending your child potentially into a situation where those things exist. So having that reporting mechanism is really important, and making sure that universities or institutes of higher education really track those numbers. We've been very fortunate at UCI where we haven't seen those explosive numbers like that are happening across the country, but there's always that potential for particularly with fentanyl out there, where a couple of grains can be a deadly overdose. If that starts creeping into your campus, you can have a real problem, and addressing that immediately, I think, is critical to the survival of an institution.
And then Randy, we've covered in 30 90-minute programs, and you were a frequent speaker, which we really appreciated, on the COVID issues and readiness for epidemics. We're not going to keep hitting that same topic. We've got a whole separate program that we really want others to and want our audiences to go back and look at. But failure to rescue is such an important area. You want to frame what we're doing together about stop the bleed kits and automatic or automated external defibrillators and getting rescue stations across UCI, and why it's so important?
Yeah, well, that's a huge part, and for California, the passage of the recent Assembly bill, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's requiring for new buildings, that every new building in California built after January 1st of this year has, I think it's 6 stop the bleed kits. That's mandatory. That's required by law now. And UC has really looked at that and is really encouraging universities to, meet at least some level of that standard on their existing buildings. We've been doing that at UCI for some time now in the development of our stop the bleed kits, are putting those kits together and distributing them around campus. We've been doing a really good job with getting those out to our police departments. We also have groups of students on campus who are all certified EMTs that conduct stop the bleed training. They've trained over 5,000 people on our campus so far. So they're doing an outstanding job of not only are we getting that equipment and those life-saving measures out there physically to the campus, but we're getting that type of training, looking at the campus through the lens of rescue, of how far are we from that 3 minutes from drop to shock or 3 minutes from shot to stop. Do we have that equipment there? And we've been doing that assessment piece to make sure that these principles of MedTech are implemented on the campus, and that somebody has a heart attack or there's, God forbid, a shooting incident or something on campus, that nobody on campus is more than a couple of minutes away from those potential life-saving measures. So we've been doing that total assessment on the campus to find those places where we have those longer distances, and potential wait times, and we're taking mitigation steps to try and address that.
Randy, thank you so much. And maybe the last question is your pitch to those that are in your institutions and your institution and higher ed and medical centers to be the leaders in the community. I think we really can be the public health leaders. Our public health system is just fragmented and frayed through the COVID crisis. And isn't there a great opportunity for our membership organizations like Scouts? I know you're a leader there and have worked with us with our Eagle Scouts, and but our nurses, our doctors, our R&D leaders, our staff, to reach out in the community and help lead stop the bleed, CPR, and a number of these skills. If we don't do it in our medical centers, who's going to do it?
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned Scouts, and that's a great organization, or any youth organization, to do that. Our first 50 stop the bleed kits that we got at UCI were part of my own son's Eagle project, where he acquired the equipment through donations and outside funding to put together 50 of those stop the bleed kits and get them out. He also had our student EMTs that I was talking about come out to his scout troop and conduct a stop the bleed training as part of that. And it was really well attended. We probably had 30 or 35 people just at that training alone get trained up on how to put on a tourniquet and how to pack a wound. Engaging the community at that level, and really at all levels, is so important. If people aren't confident in their capability to intervene in a life safety issue, then that's where that failure to rescue block is. We have to go out to the community. We have to tell people and give people the confidence to say, you can do this. Anybody can put an AED on somebody. All you have to do is take it out of the case and turn it on, and it'll tell you what to do. Anybody can put a tourniquet on somebody or pack a wound. It just takes the resolve to do it. And through those trainings and that engagement of the community, particularly our young people in the community, that is the way to get past that hesitancy to rescue or that failure to rescue. I truly believe that.
Well, Randy, thank you. And thank you for helping lead the way for our medical centers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chuck.
So as you can tell, Randy is a very passionate supporter of focusing on what medical centers can do. The UCI is responsible for about 50,000 people that are teachers and at the medical center, at the law school, at the business school, at the nursing school, and is so it's a very broad institution. And that brings me to Chief Adcox, who will now be a reactor, who's responsible for an enormous number of individuals at Texas Medical Center, where I had the great opportunity of training. He is the Chief Security Officer and Vice President at MD Anderson Cancer Center, responsible much more broadly for many, many thousands of individuals at the Texas Medical Center, for which 9 million patients are seen every year. There are 160,000 people that are within walking distance at any given time. And Chief Adcox is really a pathfinder for us in the area of threat safety science. And so, Chief, would you please react to what you've heard from Randy today? And then we're going to dig into insider threats with our dear friend David Morris. And I want you to react to his deep dive on insider threats. But I'd love to have you kind of respond to what you heard from Randy today.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Denham, for the opportunity to be here. And it's always great to hear from Randy. Randy talked first off a little bit about the cyber threats that are involved. And one of the interesting things to remember about cyber threats, there's a common pathway between an individual that's on the inside that's going to commit a cyber sabotage, for example, and someone that may commit a workplace violence from a physical harm standpoint. So basically, you know, there's personal predispositions that go into it. That's where Dr. Morris can talk a lot about the character and your hiring practices, but there are personal predispositions of individuals. On the physical side, they may have a predisposition to cause physical harm. On the cyber side, they may be into hacking. Then you look at whatever the stressors are that are going on, maybe in the workplace for a hacker, or the person on the cyber, it might be lack of resources. On the other person, it might be that they feel like they're being harassed by their fellow employees. And then it goes up to concerning behaviors that you have to watch out for. Again, remember, this is a pathway that's going up. So you're talking about, you know, concerning behavior on the cyber might be visiting inappropriate websites, the dark web. On the physical side, it might be that they're physical, you know, causing problems by, you know, verbal threats and so forth. And then, you know, you have some problematic organizational things that we do as organizations. You know, you might have a situation where you were forced to demote the person that was on the cyber side, or basically reducing their access levels, demote their access levels. On the physical side, it might be reprimands, following, you know, a history of problems or whatever it is. So you're looking at it going up. Then you get into the actual hostile act. That's where there's an execution of a malicious code. There's a sabotage, maybe even a theft of some intellectual property. And on the other side, it might be that you physically harm someone, or even up to active shooter. So there's some commonalities there that we as organizations. I bring that out because everything we talk about is, how do we get in front of it? How do we get in front of the boom, left the boom? Right. How do we do that? And we're talking about, this is a pathway. How do we interrupt that pathway? How do we understand everything from backgrounds and the right people all the way up throughout, and how we treat people in the workplace and so forth? So that's very important as we talk about that. The other thing that Randy was talking about was academic medical centers and some of the laws. He mentioned the Clery Act, and Clery Act is huge, but that's an act that just requires us to report things, basically numbers reporting. But there's much more to that. There's the Violence Against Women's Act. There's the Title IX that exists at all academic campuses. And those of us that here, again, academic medical, you're dealing in hospitals, or even hospitals that aren't part of academia, you're talking about Joint Commission standards. And effective January 1st was a new workplace violence standard. And yes, in that standard, there's a requirement for actually certain types of training amongst your employees based on your role-based training. There's best practices in terms of how you can get the reporting in. You're looking at measures and metrics. You're looking at anonymous reporting. You're looking at specific types of training. You're looking at systems in place like behavioral intervention team. So yes, there are requirements that come with the academia area. And lastly, I think we talked a little bit about the area of drug diversion. Drug diversion is quite big. It's not just a diverter that's going to be taking drugs or harming a patient by taking their medication. Those that have a habit, they have to feed it. But there's also those types of drugs that you can take that you can move to the gray or the black market. And so there's some financial incentive. But I will tell you that one of the interesting things is, at least in what we have found, if you have a person that's diverting drugs for personal use, that's generally going to be your best employees. They're going to rarely take time off. They're always going to ask you for overtime. They're going to be very close to the supervisors because they just need these drugs to maintain. So they're really not going to be loopy. They're not like we think about a drug addict that's really on the really bad side where they've really gone over the hill, or you're talking about somebody that's an alcoholic that's now on a binge and is having some issues that, because there's parts where people get totally out of control. But if you're controlling that particular addiction to a degree and you're still working, you need the money, you need the narcotics. And so we have to be real careful how we approach that. And again, through your webinars, you've had some experts on that can talk more to that. But I do think that Randy spoke a lot to a lot of these insider and outside threats. And, and so that would basically be some of my comments.
Great, Bill. And we'll come back to you because we have David Morris really covering this area beautifully. And I know that you'll have some additional comments that you'll add. Thank you for those. They were very important. And I think it's critical that we really kind of understand the complexity of this. This is not an easy thing that we're actually addressing. David Morris is a forensic psychologist. He's an attorney, and you'll hear at the end of the clip that we recorded with him yesterday. He's an MBA student at Yale University. He's in his 70s and a lifelong learner. He works all over the world. He's worked for our government. He's worked for a number of governments, and his bio reads like a movie. So I can't emphasize his breadth of experience and his knowledge. Now he's going to talk in detail and dig down a little bit. And what I wanted to do is just make sure that you all understand the definition that he's going to use. What is an insider threat? A current or past employee who either maliciously or due to complacency or ignorance used privileged access in a way that results in malfeasance, whether fraud, espionage, sabotage, theft, or violence. And what David wants us to do is really to understand that we have to broaden our definition of insider threat, much broader than it's been in the past. The other term that we want you to know about as we listen to him is what are counterproductive work behaviors, or what he calls CWBs. Any intentional act by an organization member that violates core organizational or social norms. I think if Ann Rhodes was listening here, our dear friend who I talked to yesterday, she would say that or violates the core values. And some of the examples that you'll hear a little bit about in his discussion, and we're going to come back with David and with Chief Adcox and others to really dig into this insider threat issue in detail. But this really just whets your appetite, gives you a little bit of a sampling menu of the workplace safety, code of conduct, and brand and reputation issues that'll be addressed. You're going to hear one of the terms that Chief Adcox just stated. Trigger, the idea of a trigger, someone having a propensity for these kinds of behaviors, and then a stress trigger that can lead to these events. And so I think it's important that we kind of understand some of these terms. David took a really wonderful deep dive for us. However, we'll take a much deeper dive as we dig into each one of these 30 topics in the upcoming webinars. So let's hear from David Morris. David, you have a tremendous body of experience and a tremendous bio. As we think about insider threats, what should we be aware of today in 2022?
It's a great question, Chuck. So there's no question we need to expand the concept of insider threat. In the past, the government looked at it just from espionage and sabotage in that way. However, we know that from the world of employment, we need to expand that concept to where it covers not only those issues, but any employee who uses negative behaviors to create malfeasance. And that malfeasance could be sabotage, it could be terrorism, but it could also be fraud, could be fraud. It could be any of the things that are counter to the organization or negative to the organization. And any employee that uses their privilege to gain, they have access and they use that for malfeasance. We need to expand that concept for sure.
So many of our emerging threats then really kind of fall into an overlap with that bucket you mentioned, some of them.
Right.
How do leaders become aware of the magnitude of the threat and become aware of the threat in their organization?
Well, it's only a focused approach. You've got to really dedicate time to it, because otherwise they're the great examples that really show how insider threat can damage an organization were people that really had been in the organization a long time, and they were there. And if people had just been aware and thoughtful and actually purposefully checking to make sure that they were free of insider threat, then they would have caught these people. So you really want to do exactly as you're saying. You want to increase that awareness in the leaders. The leadership needs to know this is something we need to be aware of and concerned about.
So what are the kinds of examples of recent threats that you see that leaders need to be aware of in organizations?
Well, you get employees that come in and use their privileged access to help reduce the cost of something, to give out free things that they shouldn't have been giving out free. Those are minor issues, but when they add up, it's huge. The amount that it costs the organization, it can be any organization, a hospital, it could be, just think of the damage that can be caused by that. It can be a hospital, it can be a manufacturer, and it can be the kinds of organizations I usually deal with that are security sensitive, of course. And that's the reason why it's so exaggerated in the world that I operate in, because they are aware of it and concerned with it all the time.
There's some pretty interesting subtleties that are critically important now. Conflict of interest, and where employees now have much more access to competitors' information and linkages and that kind of thing. Is conflict of interest one of the indicators when you see conflicts of interest, or you use that as a test?
Yes, you can, and you should. You want to do two things. You want to try to identify that insider threat possibility right at the beginning with screening. Really important that you target it with screening, and there are all sorts of new techniques. And I actually was one of the first to develop some of those new techniques to actually identify possible insider threats. And you can do that at the screening stage when a person is a candidate. You also want to be aware of its possibility in a candidate, its possibility in a current employee, person who's already in the organization, and it's very possible that it could be someone who's recently left the organization. So you want to know who it is and what it is. You want to expand that concept so that all of the people can be more aware of it. And but the examples of it just go on forever. There was a colonel in the Air Force, in the Canadian Air Force, and he was a decorated pilot, and he actually flew the Queen. So he was also a murderer and a rapist. And he was clearly an insider threat to the Canadian Air Force. And he was identified, Colonel Russell, and then everybody said, well, we need to be more concerned about this. Yes, we do. And we're seeing examples of it that are dramatic. Of course, the bombing of the plane that took off from Egypt, and There was a Coke bottle that had been planted, a bomb had been planted inside a Coke can, sorry. And a bomb had been planted inside just a regular laborer that was stocking the plane with Cokes and supplies, and he slipped a bomb in there. That person could have been identified earlier on in the selection. They could also be identified while for current employees, you train supervisors to be exactly as you're saying, aware of it. If they're aware of it, then they begin to notice things that don't make sense. And this is a potential that needs to be investigated. And it's amazing how you can deter insider threat if you're just aware of it, number one. But screening on the front end, you want to train employers and supervisors, especially, to be more sensitive to it so that they can be trained to notice it when it's right there in front of their face. Look at the German Wings pilot that crashed the plane into the Jura Mountains in Europe. And everybody said, well, we knew something was going on there. We knew he was wrong. Yes, you knew it, but you weren't aware of it, and you should have said something. It could have saved a lot of lives. It has saved an entire industry. The company went bankrupt after that, of course. So
you brought up aviation, and it sounds like in our confidential discussions, we won't use any names, but aviation-oriented companies, both commercial, private, are really catching on to this because they have so much to lose. Is it fair to say that they're really increasing their focus on this issue?
yes.
And is that parallel to healthcare? Our leaders are healthcare leaders, and we both deal in life and threat issues. Sure. I'm a jet pilot. I've had a huge amount of training as a private pilot and came from an aviation family, and there's some great parallelisms between aviation and healthcare.
Yeah, no, it is definitely parallel. And it has so many parallels. There's police that I work with, and just came out of Fiji, and that was one of the focuses there, insider threat. It also has, with the healthcare industry, there's no question about it. You just want to make sure you expand that concept. And that was one of the presentations I gave at the aviation industry a couple of years ago. I said, you've got to expand the concept of insider threat so that you can try to identify it in entry-level and by entry-level selection techniques. You also want to train supervisors. Easy to do that. And we've been contacted by, as you know, by one of the major industries in the companies in the aviation industry, and to provide that kind of training so that supervisors will be aware of it. And that awareness is really important.
Well, so you brought up a really good point. That's our second A, which is accountability. And it appears to us, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the leaders need to allocate the resources, but those that must be accountable to detect the behaviors and use these tools and really be accountable for improving and identifying behaviors, and the tools are the mid-level management. Is that a fair statement that they?
That is a very correct statement. That is where the top, of course, needs to know about it. The action needs to come from training from the middle managers and supervisors. That is really where the target is for the incumbent force. Then you want HR involved on the screening, because there are screening tools that will address that are well known. We've created some of the very first ones, and they currently use the ones we developed in the nuclear industry, in aviation, and also in law enforcement and public safety. So those original tools that we developed have been extensively used now in a broad range of industries.
So David, I'm going to kind of focus in on this accountability issue and allow you to kind of expand on it. So if we look at a typical 300-bed hospital in America, which are the most common and the average, but they're rolling up into very large organizations. When we think about insider threat, who should own it? Security? Threat, should it be risk management? Should it be HR? Should it be a team of all three of those with some representation by the chief operating officer? What kind of an approach can you take with a team that would be accountable? Because no one person can cover all these bets.
You're right. It's definitely a risk issue. it's a liability issue, no question about it. So you've got to involve the team, and the team has to recognize, be aware of it, and then they need to take action. There needs to be training programs. It's the first thing. You could just do a training program, and that's so easy to do. And the effect of the training program is pretty good. All of a sudden now people are aware of something that they weren't even aware of before, because as you and I both know, there are three elements of knowledge. The Greeks used to say there's what we don't know, there's what we know, and there's also what we don't even know that we don't know. And that third one is the one that's most dangerous in insider threat. So the supervisors don't even know that they're to be aware of insider threat. They need to be trained and have that knowledge.
Well, you're such a wealth of knowledge, because most people thought that Secretary Rumsfeld came up with the known knowns, the unknown knowns, and the unknown unknowns, and it was the Greek, was it?
It's been well known before Secretary Rumsfeld, but he was my boss when I was working in Iraq. And when he said it, I said, he is right. The third one is the most dangerous, what we don't know that we don't even know we don't know. And it's what keeps me a student. Right. Constantly, all my life. I will always be a student, because I'm aware that we need to learn more. But in insider threat in particular, it's incredibly dangerous. And think of the lives that could have been saved, the money, the loss, the risk, insurance could have been helped by actually addressing that with simple selection and training programs.
Right. So we've talked about accountability, and really it sounds like a team needs to be accountable.
Absolutely.
To things. Let's cover the third A, is ability. Somebody can be accountable, but not equipped with the resources, with the light green dollars of capacity and people's time, the dark green dollars of cash, and then the knowledge, the concepts, tools, and resources that are critical. What are those? What are the most, you've touched on them a little bit. Let's dig into them a little bit more. The screening tools, the educational tools. Are there patterns and pattern recognition we can learn about that cross all industries?
Yes. Oh, yes. The training involves patterns of behavior. So and we go into what is an insider threat, and then we give a clear definition and a broad definition that can cover lots of things. And then so supervisors can be trained to be aware of it. If you all of a sudden see behavior that changes in a person and they haven't been like this before, you wonder if in fact that is the stressor, because we know that the insider threat, the manifestation of that possibility is there in the employee, and it's also there in the candidate, and it's there in the person who's left the company. And so you really want to make sure that you understand what the trigger is. The trigger for the person feels that they haven't been treated right, that the company has treated them poorly and unjustly. And all of a sudden, that can be the trigger for the insider threat that could have been identified by the supervisor, by supervisory training, or by selection on the front end. So these things, what causes that can be various things, but we know what they are. But in fact, you really want to make sure that you identify it on the front end, and then you want to train the supervisors so they can identify it on those employees that are incumbents, that are already in the workforce.
So a real easy story after active shooter events for the press, who will jump on whatever. If it leads, it leads. Never let the facts get between you and a good story. And good story is controversy, combat, and cover up, right? Those are the rules I've learned over the years. And the press will always jump on leakage that occurred in social media. Should our mid-level managers learn and understand how to recognize this leakage of information that might lead one to believe that there is somebody that might be interested in harming the organization?
Yes, they should be. And in fact, you're touching on something that's gotten to be pretty sophisticated in terms of recognizing in emails, and you look for trigger words. There are trigger words, and if you see those in the media and social media, then you know you need to further investigate. we used the same thing. We did the work down in Guanajuato, the most dangerous state in all of Mexico, to help them. What should they be looking for? And we trained them on what trigger words and what words should be looked for, and then explore it, talk to them. And that's the first stage, to identify that there could be a problem here. Then you want to explore it. And so there's an entire industry. In fact, there's internet programs that look in social media for the employees. They look, and it's a program, and they look and they investigate and they look for these trigger words. So yes, it's becoming more and more developed. Thank goodness it is, but it also brings up issues of privacy and some other issues. But those will always be with us. The main thing is right now is that we know that insider threat, we need to expand it, that it affects all industry, and especially the ones that you and I are involved in with healthcare. The safety net is so important that insider threat is more important to those in the safety net than it is to a warehouse, perhaps, I think.
So our audience, we pray and hope, because they've developed over the years with us as patient safety officers, men and women of goodwill who have really been championing the cause of protecting their patients. But there's a darker side too. There's the organizations that actually have forced employees to paper the HR file of an employee that may have been involved in a medical error, and they retroactively paper the file to make them look bad and make them look like a bad actor and look like a pattern of an insider threat. What about the insider threat of the organization that may not be living up to the highest moral and noble values in healthcare, and those mid-level managers that feel forced to state things that are improper and sully the reputation of those and create professional liability for honest people that have made mistakes that now they might hang out to dry on behalf of the organization? What about that threat?
There's no question that's a real threat, and we've seen it manifested in recent lawsuits. And people actually, it's a shame that happens, but it's more important for us to recognize that it will happen and it can happen. So we need to be aware of it and actually look for it and be sensitive to it. Your first A is really right. First, be aware of it, and I think that's the part that once you're aware of it, you say, what can we do about it? Well, we can do training. That's easy, and that helps. It's very effective. Then you can actually do screening on the front end for these negative work behaviors and things that can easily be manifested later by a trigger. And you just want to identify it on the front end and let them, they can become successful in another field, perhaps, but you don't want them in your organization. So, and then you can actually make sure you deal with it when the person leaves the company. You want to be very sensitive to and aware of it first, and then what can we do about it? And there are things you can do about it. When you let someone go, there's a way that you can continue to garner goodwill from that person even after they've left the company. And these are well-known HR tools that are available to a company to try to address that possible insider threat.
So you've mentioned HR numerous times, and we definitely have really learned a lot from co-founders of JetBlue, Ann Rhodes, and others who have really helped us understand how we can tie behaviors to core values. And one of the core values that seems to be common in organizations is highly valuing direct action. Those that really want to act. That's our fourth A, is the line of sight actions that then can correct a problem or prevent a problem from happening. What are the line of sight actions our audience could take if they are just becoming aware of insider threats at hospitals, maybe smaller hospitals, and we've got safety officers and leaders, but they don't have an organized insider threat initiative? What are the line of sight actions they could take? Our dear mentor, Don Berwick, would always say, what can you do by Tuesday?
You're exactly right. The first thing you want to do is, if you see something, say something. I mean, that's it. That's the first thing you can do. And who do you say it to? You say it to HR and supervisors, you say, I'm not sure, but I did notice this and it's concerning me. So that is the most important thing. You say things so that it can be explored.
So, are you an advocate of anonymous reporting systems? Because the first fear is the retaliation of an organization on a whistleblower.
Yes, I am a supporter of anonymous because I think knowledge is really helpful. On the other hand, it can be damaging. So you've got to check and see where you've got to be careful when it's anonymous. But in fact, you can easily verify or check the outcome of that to see. And if they're telling you, I don't want to tell you, but there's a bomb threat you have. You don't want to just ignore that, really. I mean, the consequence of ignoring the threat, the notice, the awareness is usually bigger than the consequence of ignoring it. The consequence of ignoring it is too big to actually ignore it. You've got to treat it with respect and be careful, and be it needs to be handled delicately.
Well, as you know, we have really developed the framework of the 4 Ps: prevention, preparedness, protection, and performance improvement. Prevention is to prevent the event from ever happening. As you know, secondary prevention is prevent harm if something does happen. Preparedness is a state of readiness. Protection is, okay, it's happening. What do I do to prevent the harm? And performance improvement is, what do I learn from other events so that I won't let this, I can learn from them so that I'm prepared. If we talk about left of boom is prevention and preparedness, what about right of boom after the bad thing happens? Any advice to organizations who have had an insider threat where they incur the damage and something bad has happened because of an insider? Any advice on what to do in the immediate aftermath of an event?
It's a broad range of after effects. It depends on the severity of it and the consequence of it. And so I don't really have any advice that would match up with that. But the first advice would be, it is an issue. It needs to be dealt with. You just don't say it's finished and sweep it under the rug. You really want to make sure that there's attention given to it and that it is dealt with, because after the effect is just as important as before the effect.
David, you've just been such a joy to work with and so insightful. You have a JD, a PhD, and now you're pursuing an MBA. What's your advice to adult students?
I'd say go for it. It's that third element of knowledge that I didn't even know that there's things that I'm getting. And I'm at Yale, and it's a great school, and they're teaching me things that I didn't know. And I'm in a class now, and they said, so tell me how your organization design is working. And I said, I can do that. But more importantly, I'm here to learn from you how it needs to improve. And so I'm enjoying Yale, and I am a lifetime student, and I worry about what I don't know that I didn't know that I didn't know. And so every time I go to class, I'm just in awe that there's so much that we can learn and improve the world. There's a lot to be done. So I'm glad to be a part of it. I always
say, fight the good fight, finish the race, and keep the faith. So we'll be thinking of you. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Chuck. Good to talk with you.
So he is just a terrific contributor to us and has spoken numerous times. Bill, your thoughts and comments. We covered a lot of ground there, and we still have a little bit to go. We're going to have about 5-minute overview of what bystander rescue care and why it's so important. So you'll get to react again to Dr. Boats, our wonderful partner. But what would you like to underscore or comment regarding what you've heard from David Morris?
Well, first off, Dr. David Morris is a pioneer and a leader in the area of police promotion selections and quality systems. And I have a great deal of respect for him, and you can tell from his speech what he knows. But he did talk about this awareness and training issue, and I do think it needs to be it needs to be role based. It needs to be by by leadership, supervision, employees. You really need to identify what an individual's role is as you're going through that. The other thing is you really have to have good, strong systems and processes that are in place. And the important part about that is there should not be exceptions that are based on assumed or presumed privilege or friendships, making sure that doesn't happen. I always think of integrity testing or auditing systems that are in place that make sure that we're not circumventing things, we're not skipping parts, or that there is actually, for example, in the financial world, you don't have you have a separation of duties. You don't have the same person that's seeking a product that's actually writing up the purchase order, then authorizing the payment. You want to make sure that there's separations, things like that. There needs to be consistency and monitoring of employees. You might do due diligence on an employee coming in, and then after they're in, because of these various stressors and life events, and a person can become unfortunately addicted or have a habit of something else, whether it's gambling or something else. But you need to have consistent monitoring, for example, of cases that come up against people. There's programs out there that allows you to know that Bill Adcox has been arrested for domestic violence, aggravated assault, or that Bill Adcox is getting sued over a fraud claim or something like that. So you want to just look at it. Now, again, those are not things that you're just going to accept as law. I mean, those are just indicators and things that you want to look into, because the goal is to get as much prevention and early intervention as you can. So you need all these systems in place. So I do think that that's very important. And when we think about these insider threats, it's really having a team effort. And you talked about who owns it. Well, I think that you really need to have an executive team that's the sponsor and has ownership of this whole issue of insider threat in general. But I also think that you have a multidisciplinary, cross-functional team that's well trained and does have all the appropriate concepts that you develop. It has the appropriate tools that are out there, and even maybe some in-house developed tools, and that has the resources to carry out their duties. And that these processes should be going on all the time. And if you have to, you can anonymize these processes so that you don't target a person until it comes up to a certain criteria. And then you look at the person and say, we have enough behaviors of concern. There's these things that are going on. Who is that? And then you bring it in, you assign it to a confidential investigator to look at it. You want to protect your employees. You want to protect the integrity of your organization, but you've got to have these things in place so that you can get an early jump on it. You can get in and get somebody some help, or even to the point where if you need to stop some hemorrhage or you need to stop somebody from doing something, you can. And those things are very, very important. And having a very strong ethical mission that's in place and holding everybody to that, building that culture is going to be important. But remember, we're dealing with human beings and we are all fallible, and there's always going to be issues. And therefore you have these real positive programs that are in place. And you mentioned anonymous reporting, and I will tell you that I think that's very powerful and very important. Whether or not it's going on, you can argue that all day long, but people believe that they're going to get retaliated against.
Yeah, absolutely.
I believe that. And to take that away, you just say, hey, you can have anonymous reporting. Now, again, it's anonymous. So therefore, you do your due diligence and you do your research to make sure that you get enough of parts and pieces or evidence, if you will, or facts together that says, okay, maybe we really need to look at this deeper. And then maybe you get to the point, but you might sure you don't impact an employee until you have something solid, but you have these processes and systems in place that get you there. So those are things that I think are important as we refer to our employees. You mentioned human resources, great tool. I do think that for example, performance evaluations and other things, it's all now technology. Technology is very easy to audit. You can't change those things. If you do, you get a good forensic person in there. They can determine that. So I think it's much harder for if you had a nefarious organization and they had weaponized the human resource component. That's going to be very difficult to do. And so I think if you have all these other pieces in place, that you're going to put a good stopgap on something like that.
I think I agree with you 100% that it's very hard to do without leaving evidence to get caught. The problem is the prosecutors and those that really we would rely on to protect those employees is almost totally absent. So the evidence is there, but many organizations know that nobody's going to follow up on it. So that makes it kind of tough. I'm going to shift gears. Bill, great comments, really. And the issue regarding the teams, the point you made is so valuable, the executive team and being resourced. So those of you that don't know us, Dr. Gregory Boats is really our clinical lead. He is both a full professor of anesthesia and critical care at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. But he's also a clinical professor at Stanford Medical Center, where he had extra training in and did a fellowship in simulation. And he gave us the term deliberative practice and has really been a wonderful champion and our go-to person in our MedTech program, and would not exist were it not for Bill, who you just heard from, and Greg Boats. And what we're going to ask Greg to do, and he's on vacation, but we were able, and he's so committed to help us that no matter whether he's on vacation or not, or whether he's in the ICU, he is steadfastly in support of helping us with the work that we're doing. And so I'm going to play the video of Dr. Boats now, a just short 5-minute video, and have Greg and then also Charlie Denham, and then have Bill Adcox react with a final reaction. Dr. Boats, thank you very much for sharing your time with us while you're on vacation. We really appreciate it. Just your first thoughts and what we need to think about in terms of when patients and families are on the property of our medical centers, and what our responsibilities are and the opportunity there.
Well, that's a very important consideration in our healthcare environment, because there are concerns about what happens in and around our medical centers. In fact, EMTALA, which is one of the federal regulations regarding transfer of patients, speaks to our responsibility to people who present on our property within 250 yards. The hospital is responsible for those people because they may be presenting to seek care for an emergency medical condition. And so the more that we are prepared to both identify people who are having a presumed medical emergency and start their bystander care while we are summoning the resources either from EMS or from the hospital itself to address these needs, that's clearly a failure to rescue opportunity that we can fill with bystander care capability in our healthcare providers and non-healthcare providers who work on our campuses.
Dr. Boats, who at a smaller hospital, you're at a major medical center and really leading the way for us at MD Anderson and really a pathfinder, but who could be or should be responsible for being accountable for that in a smaller hospital, in a smaller facility?
Well, certainly the hospital has accountability for it, and they would have to determine what services they have available, whether that's a medical emergency team or a code blue team that would respond on the grounds of their campus to evaluate someone who may be having a medical condition. But I think it's the responsibility of the community on any hospital staff to recognize when they see people who are on the property who might be having signs and symptoms of a medical emergency, who haven't quite not yet made it to the emergency room. Having the ability to both recognize and manage the signs and symptoms of an emergency situation can be life-saving until the hospital's designated resources can arrive and begin the care that's necessary.
Well, Dr. Boats, you have really helped lead us since 2015 on this mission of bystander rescue care and beating the clock, if you will, to have bystanders learn the skills necessary until EMS or professional caregivers arrive. What's your pitch to medical centers to have their staff be leaders in the community and kind of get with the program on these 8 areas where we could really have some impact before professional caregivers arrive?
Well, I know there's no doubt that the ability of a bystander to recognize someone who is in harm's way with a medical emergency or other threat to their safety, they can do easy to learn and deploy, but also life-saving, that can fill the gap between when the event occurs and when professional first responders arrive. And it takes very little investment in time for those bystanders to learn the skills to both recognize and intervene in a safe way that will clearly, according to the data, have a great impact on that person's outcome in that brief gap between the initiation of a medical emergency and when the professional first responders get there.
You've really helped us understand the skills. And once we got the community really fired up with the skills, we realized that there needed to be rescue stations or gear on site. And this is really much easier than people would think, isn't it? Most of the rescue automated defibrillators and the other rescue gear is pretty standardized. It's just a matter of making it available. Is that a fair statement?
So the advent of the public access to defibrillation movement fostered by the American Heart Association and other community groups to make life-saving equipment like the automated external defibrillator available to bystanders, that was revolutionary because it showed us that you could take life-saving tools and put them in a public domain so that bystanders could use them and actually impact the outcomes of people suffering a medical emergency. And so the idea of having a rescue station that may have an automated defibrillator, stop the bleed kits, an EpiPen or Narcan or other interventions that can be rapidly deployed until professional first responders respond is key to the approach to identifying and managing these medical emergencies in the gap.
Well, thank you very much for your guidance. And we're so excited to see that actually happening here in Southern California, where lives have already been saved with some of the gear that we placed and by young people in high school. So we really appreciate your leadership.
Thank you.
So Dr. Boats has really helped inspire this area. And what we want to do is we'll finish up talking about this preventable death or severe injury that Randy Steiner addressed and said that our higher education organizations, our medical centers, really have a responsibility to the students and those that are undertaking R&D and the work that they're undertaking to be able to have that kind of impact. What we're going to do now, before we have Chief Adcox respond again, is just to address this area of preventable harm, death, and this terrible issue of the opioid crisis. And we really want to challenge organizations to say, look, if it isn't you that will reach out and help your community, who will it be? So let's hear from Charlie Dennett.
I'm a high school student looking forward to college. Most of us are really unaware of the potential threats we face and the opportunity to save lives through bystander rescue care. The opioid crisis truly is impacting every community, and we hope our video messages will help you build awareness in yours. The emerging threat of death and severe injury to the families of those in higher education and the healthcare system is definitely something you as healthcare experts can address. Bystander rescue care is something everyone can learn. Everyone is a patient and everyone can be a caregiver.
Interestingly, Charlie's life has been saved through cardiac screening, the Heimlich maneuver, and a near-drowning event, so he has a deep appreciation for bystander care. He and our expert team led a webinar on September 15th of this year in response to the opioid crisis and the surge of counterfeit pills and rainbow-colored fentanyl-laced products that are targeting our young people and our children. They helped produce an opioid briefing film, and they're producing a documentary which is a takeoff of and supports the DEA One Pill Can Kill campaign. The film, entitled One Pill Did Kill, is the dramatization of a true story of friends dying of counterfeit pills the same night. It will be released as soon as possible as free media to combat our national failure to rescue our youth and children from this terrible crisis. So, Bill, Your thoughts regarding what Dr. Boats said, and this issue of severe injury and death that might occur on the property, but not inside the hospital. So somebody on the way in to the emergency department, somebody leaving, we know of the lethal force incidents, many of them happen on the grounds outside of our facilities, and the same for faith-based organizations. An enormous number happen just outside the door. The responsibility of our medical centers and higher ed for not only what's happening during the workday, but don't we have a great opportunity to be public health leaders and work through the families of everyone that we are protecting during the day and get them challenged to help protect their families for 24/7, not just 8 hours they're on site? Your thoughts?
Well, exactly. First off, you mentioned that where most of the real violent, particularly active shooters, take place, and when it comes to hospitals, and it's almost always at an entrance or even in a parking area. But it does occasionally make it into a facility. And so, yeah, those are things that you're talking about. There's also this issue and the debate, I suspect, around if it's outside the hospital, what's your requirements and duties and frankly, what's your liability? But all that should go out the window when it comes to saving lives. And what we do know is that if we do get enough people trained in bystander care, we can address the 7 or 8 most preventable causes of death. And having the right supplies and things that are very closely available and accessible. I think you talked about 3 minutes, from drop to shock. Well, the AEDs and stop the bleed kits and first aid kits, et cetera, an Narcan, EpiPens, they all should be within just a few minutes of where people are at. And so I think that's the goal. And so that is very critical, and I don't think there's anything around it. And if you think about it, if you do train your employees and your other individuals on all of these different med tech techniques, the plethora of first aid type of training, which you mentioned it's easy. I would say that it's doable for virtually anyone, and really the only thing that would prevent you from being able to do it, maybe if you're really small, is your ability to do a compression from a strength standpoint. But it's something that can be learned, and everybody should do it. But if you get your employees and everybody done it to do it, and then you bring your hospitals and organizations start to sponsor these programs, you will start training family members. You will start training the rest of the community. And the more we can do that, the more lives that can be saved. And there's no doubt about it. And the more that we can learn and the more things that we can do to help one another. So yeah, this bystander care is without a doubt probably one of the most important things that we can all do to help one another and to save lives inside and outside of hospitals.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you for your steadfast support of this work. In the slide deck, and for those of you that want to watch a longer version and get a little bit more detail, we're working with College 911, which is an organization that is helping higher education institutions understand what's important and to help students understand that they really need to have a medical power of attorney. They can use their smartphone to notify family members. They really need to know their emergency providers, and also if they have healthcare issues, keep their medical record on their phone. And this was inspired by, and those of you that are on the podcast, if you go to look at the slides, you'll see Nanette Hausman and her son Corey, who passed away after what appears to be a preventable death on a university campus. And she's championed the cause at great cost to herself to help both state bills, but federal bills to help increase transparency. And we'll be covering this more in detail. However, we really do know that these MedTech targets in the areas that we're working on are really, really important in terms of what we can do in our organizations. For those of you that are attending with us for the 90-minute continuing education, for continuing medical education and continuing nursing education, we'll wrap up here in the next couple of minutes. And so you can go on to your clinical shifts. We will, however, introduce you to some of the thoughts of Dr. Casey Clements, who is emergency medicine director at the Mayo Clinic, where I had the privilege of being on faculty as a systems engineer, health systems engineer, and had extra training at Mayo. And I'm a Mayo patient, and I think a lot of the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And Casey Clements is not only not only an MD, an emergency medicine specialist, and an administrative leader at Mayo Clinic, but he calls himself a recovering researcher in that he was a researcher in the area of microbiology. I'm going to play just a couple minutes of his longer session that was delivered July 15th, 2021. It is very, very timely. And I think everything that he has shared about how they're teaming up in the community has been terrific. So I'm just going to play just a couple minutes and then we'll wrap up.
There we go. Everybody should be able to see that now. Give me a nod, Chuck, if you can see that.
Very good.
All right. So this is actually a difficult topic to talk about. So, Chuck just talked about failure to rescue and how important it is from a first healthcare point of contact to have coordinated care for an emergency through first responder, fire police, EMS, and into emergency departments and hospitals. That works very well when we're dealing with medical emergencies that have a system set up to care for them. It works very well when we have psychiatric emergencies that a patient will fit into that is set up in order to care for them. It doesn't always work as well when the systems aren't set up to care for the patient. And so we're going to pull back the curtain a little bit today on healthcare and how we interact with public services. And I'm going to talk a lot about my hospital and my hometown and my communities here. That being said, this could probably be replayed in almost every community across our country. So I'm very interested in our panel's views as we get through this. Okay, so I have no financial interests, as Chuck said. All the images here are actually licensed to be used. So as far as objectives, we're going to define the sometimes competing needs of what happens with public safety. This is our police, our jails, this is our county attorneys, and the public safety structures with first responders, et cetera, as well as our hospitals. We're going to talk about how it can be really challenging when we start talking about behavioral emergencies of differentiating mental illness that can require treatment by a psychiatrist or a psychologist like Dr. Morris, and what may just be bad behavior that is so far out of bounds that we can't comprehend that wouldn't be mental illness. And who decides what that who decides if it is mental illness? Third, we're going to recognize a real disparity in our country between chemical health use, dependence and abuse, and the resources available to them and how they're accessed. This is a huge problem as we look forward to the future, and I think COVID is probably going to make it worse. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some solutions. At each step, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we've taken, some of the steps we've taken to try to mitigate these, including some best practices that I think other hospitals might be interested in. All right, so I'm reminded when I speak about public safety, EMS, fire, and police of Fred Rogers, right? When something goes wrong, you look for the helpers. These are the people who run towards problems and not away from it. And we owe them all a great debt of gratitude, right? We do. And all of these folks go into work wanting to help people every day. And what they do or how they do that varies. And when the system isn't set up to be able to help the people that are in front of them, they don't always have options for what to do.
So I'm going to stop there. And the reason is that I gave you that to you as a teaser to give you the opportunity to go back and watch the full session on our website. And the reason is that Dr. Clements, Casey has done a fabulous job of describing how and then doing it in terms of teaming up with those in the community, the district attorney, the police department, fire, and EMS, and actually has police officers there in their site. Now, the first first thing that you would pop into your mind is, well, the Mayo Clinic's got so many resources. However, when you hear what Casey talks about and applies cases and case studies, you see that there's a terrific opportunity for collaboration and communication to keep people that are really in dire straits from being just dropped off at your emergency department, and address so many of the issues like workplace violence in our emergency department. So I really would wish that you would go back and listen to Casey. We're going to have him back longer. Today has been a review of the 30 top issues. We didn't cover all of them in detail, but we thought we better get a good grounding in insider threats and cover a number of the topics. In the future webinars, we'll cover one or two of the topics that make sense to be covered together in our 90-minute programs. And for those of you that are in the podcast, please come to our website to watch the videos, and we post resources you can download as well. So I will close us now. Thank you. God bless all of you. We always give the voice of the patient to a patient or family member. And Jenny couldn't be on with us live today. She's also on vacation with her family. So she will close us today. And we look forward to covering more of the emerging threats next week. Please consider joining our collaborative. And thank you so very much for your help. And we'll now listen to the recorded session from last night from our dear friend and collaborator, Jenny Dingman. Thank you so much.
What a great webinar. I want to thank all of our speakers for all of their wisdom and knowledge that you shared with us today. And I want to thank all of our participants for being here. Please share the recording of this webinar with your friends, families, and colleagues. Thank you for being here. God bless you all, and we'll see you next month.